Hello and welcome to Required Reading, the podcast that revisits the most impactful books from our childhood. I'm your host, Erin Bowles. I am a writer, actor, and little scamp. And our guest today is Walt Jones. He is an LA-based actor, writer, and comedian. His TV credits include Chicago Justice, You Can Do Better, and Netflix's Unbelievable. He can be seen in national commercials for AT&T and Taco Bell, and has written jokes on multiple commercial campaigns for Cricket Wireless. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Erin. It's so good to see you.
Our book today, I'm elated for, is The Golden Compass by Sir Philip Pullman. Also, I didn't know this, was released originally in the UK under the title Northern Lights.
I actually knew that. I remember it was like a Harry Potter situation.
Yeah.
Philosopher's Stone, Sorcerer's Stone, Northern Lights, The Golden Compass. Sort of a bigger discrepancy, but
And I think a much better title. Northern Lights
yeah.
reveals nothing.
It's so vague, and like they do become a very pivotal part of the journey, I'll say, but they're not anywhere near the center of the book compared to the actual
Yeah.
Golden Compass or the Alethiometer.
I loved it. I was first introduced to this series because of the 2007 movie, and they
Hmm.
had like you could buy your own
Hmm.
alethiometer, and I had one. It was just like a lever you could pull, and it would make a really
Hmm.
loud sound. But I had such a kick out of it. How did this book come into your life? What's your story with it?
I think it was a book that my mom had read. My mom has always been a big reader, and I grew up reading a lot of fantasy, and we would read together quite a bit. And I remember, I think like maybe the movie had come out, and I knew that like she had read at least the first or second book. And I was like, oh, I'll give it a go. And I read it, and I remember it being so much like darker than I expected it to be.
Absolutely.
And I loved that. I was really, really excited that it tackled some like taboo themes because as a kid, you're like, I don't get to like dive deep into this. This is exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my mom was always very like, you should absolutely read all these different perspectives. And like, who cares if it's like scary or sacrilegious, perhaps?
The book was definitely, in doing some research about it, was definitely like challenged by a lot of religious groups. I remember that like very vaguely around the book, but I was so fascinated by it. I loved this book. This is the only time we've read a book on this podcast it was my third reading of this book.
Mm,
I read it when I was younger, and I only read that one. And then when we were shooting Flatch season one, so like 2020, 2021, I read the whole series.
yeah.
And just phenomenal books.
It's
Just incredible.
it's a special circumstance when the sequels hold up and are like even more exciting than the original. Like it continued to be such a fascinating series, and all of the characters that even like the characters that live through the books, but then the characters that are introduced are, incredibly interesting, and they all add very, very particular flavors and perspectives, which I was so excited for. And I loved the I mean, I'm guessing we're probably fixating on the first one today, but the throughout all the books, the different worlds that we enter, the devices that are used that maybe bring to light just truths that we can't see in our reality or our dimension was very exciting to me. And so I think that that kind of like magical realism, taking something that we understand quite literally, or maybe it's an idea that's not super tangible, but making it super tangible was always really exciting.
My gosh. Don't feel bound just to talk about the first book. Go
Okay.
crazy, go crazy. I don't have solid memories of the second and third,
Yeah.
but I did have to like go through and was like, what actually happened?
There's a lot
Um
that happens. Yeah. It's
there's
it's a dense series.
Yeah, I remembered a lot with her and Will, and I remembered a
Mhm.
lot of the third book with like the elephant creatures because I was so
Mhm.
hard for me to. I'm a very visual, not necessarily a visual person, but certainly a visual reader,
Yes.
which is I think why I think I read the book before the movie came out, but like a lot of things, I read it because I knew there was a movie coming out, and that like
Right.
I couldn't read Harry Potter until I saw it, and I was like being able to put visuals to concepts.
Especially in the third one, there are a lot of visual, like the elephant creatures that have these like wheels that they've basically their bodies are attuned to utilize these nuts that have like
Yeah.
fallen from these massive trees, and these nuts they use them to wheel around. And it was such like a departure from kind of the other creatures or the worlds that we had seen in the previous books, that it was exciting and it was interesting, and I really enjoyed those sections. But yeah, I totally that was definitely a part that I remember being like, I cannot imagine how, like, what is the bone structure of this creature?
Yeah.
I could not fathom it.
I am so excited to talk specifically about Pullman because I think like just a dude I want to know. Just such a cool person. He was knighted in 2019
Mm,
for his services to literature. He was named by the Times in 2008 one of the 50 greatest British writers since 1945.
mm.
2004 BBC poll named the 11th most influential person in British culture.
Oh my gosh,
I
I wow.
know. It won the Carnegie Medal for the Carnegie's 70th anniversary. It was there was a panel that was supposed to come up with a short list for voting for an all-time favorite, and they put it in there in the top 10. It was named by the public vote the Carnegie of Carnegies, number
Mm,
one. It was the whole series was ranked third in the BBC's Big Read poll in 2003. So he grew up before the age of like 7 in Kenya. His father was an RAF pilot. He
wow.
died in a crash, and so Pullman like really lionized him. He saw this guy as a hero, killed in defending his country. And then I think in an interview in 2008, he was presented with some contrary information. It was during the what's called the Mau Mau uprising, which was
Mm,
basically Kenyan people standing up to British colonial rule in the 50s. And he was not sort of like defending his country. He was like bombing and machine gunning people who had almost no like ability to shoot back, almost no sort of ability to defend themselves.
mm.
And which is like, this was, I think, 13 years after the books came out, and yet, like, so Lyra. So, like, of having this really
Wow.
glorified parent that you learn all these different things about. Um, and in 2017, he hinted that the plane crash might have been deliberate, that his
Mm.
father, there was something odd about the crash. He, quote, just took his plane up and flew it into the side of the hill. And there were rumors about like debt, maybe an affair. And the year after that, his mom remarried. They moved to North Wales. He discovered a love of comic books, of Milton and William Blake. He spent time with his grandfather, who was in the clergy. Went to university, married, had kids. He taught at a middle school and wrote school plays, which I loved. And then he started publishing his novels. He stopped teaching after his second book was published. And he said that, I loved this so much. He said he wanted to write fantasy realistically with,
Mm.
he said there was no reason why fantasy shouldn't be realistic in a psychological sense. And it was the lack of that sort of realism that I objected to in the work of the big Tolkien and all the little Tolkiens, which was so harsh. And he said that it's a direct rebuttal to the Narnia series, which he saw as religious propaganda, which,
Yes, it is very, very reminiscent. I mean, just like there are so many like themes in the book, and also just visual elements that are so reminiscent of the Narnia series. I
yeah.
specifically think about like, Lyra's Lucy, you
Hmm.
know?
Absolutely.
And yes, it is absolutely the opposite of what Narnia, the propaganda per se, it definitely does not lean into that.
And I love that it was not necessarily like, I think, well, I was gonna say, like, it's not explicitly like anti God. And there's like, no, I think Lord Asriel, and the second one is like, I'm gonna fight God.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
gonna kill
no, yeah,
God.
he says, I'm going to kill God.
Which, damn, I can't hate. Especially like this was hilariously also came up in our Narnia episode. I cannot, if James McAvoy is playing a character, he
Mhm.
can't do anything wrong.
Right.
at least to me. But like you said, like there's to the point where in one of the first scenes, the inciting incident happens while Lyra is in a wardrobe. It's so on the nose, and what a way to start a book.
It's
She,
such an exciting way.
yeah, it's incredible. It's a great device to lay out a lot of like plot and
Mhm.
technicalities through like a PowerPoint presentation, and yet almost all of it occurs outside of her visual
Mhm.
world, which I think it was great. And I have so many things to touch on. I think I first wanted to ask just like what was religion like in your childhood? Was it at
Hmm.
all in the scope? Like it's the big thing with this book.
Yeah, I definitely was not raised religious whatsoever. I would say my parents are both, at pretty agnostic. I grew up in the South. I grew up in North Carolina, so there was definitely a lot of, religious peers around me. And I don't know. I mean, I think that like my perspective on religion for a long time was just that it was like a sense of community for people. I think I had a lot of friends that, regularly went to church or temple, and that was a big part of their life or their upbringing. And then as I got older, I was like really just like anti-religion. I was super, super rebellious in the sense that I was just like, we need to like actively speak against this. Just because I, have a lot of issues
Yeah.
with organized religion in general, and I think that this book series was just it really spoke to me because I think that so much of what Pullman is trying to say throughout this series is that there is a lot of propaganda and there is a lot of issues with organized religion and the way that it is built to uplift certain people while keeping other people in their place in a lower caste system. And I think that this book really, this whole series really like does not shy away from saying like this is how you are, this is how you will be treated and how it will be spun.
I think one of the overriding messages in the book is that adults can be wrong
Hmm.
and things are so complex. I think these are some of the best characters I've ever read.
Hmm.
And that and to challenge, to question. Um, I think the first thing I wanted to talk about is this concept. I think in the show they call it daemons. How do you want to pronounce this word? Because I don't know.
I always imagine as demons.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
good.
Matt Damon's.
Well, it was all very British, and I think they might have instead of master said Meister.
We just know that's wrong. That's wrong.
And I have lost my HBO login, so we're never gonna know. So
I actually never watched the HBO rendition of this. Yeah, it felt like it happened, and then I became aware of it a year later. I was like, had no clue it was being promoted.
I watched the first season and it was excellent. I mean, the cast, like Ruth Wilson, I think is the perfect Mrs. Coulter. I think just like
Mm.
she has this iciness and this depth to her,
Mhm.
just phenomenal. And I can't think of her name, but the girl who played Lyra,
Mhm.
phenomenal. And Lyra
Okay.
is a character that I would take a bullet for. I
Yeah,
love this little girl so much. Um,
she's such a badass.
she is, and it is written in such an insightful way. There is such clarity of character there, and I think also such a clarity of her age. I saw this TikTok about, I think like very young kids are on TikTok now, and someone was commenting on like when you are 10, you're trying on different personalities, different
Hmm.
groups, like trying to find where you fit. And that is exactly what Lyra experiences. There's like
Hmm.
she's on the Egyptian boat and 3 days in, she's got the language down. She's saying like I never want to leave here. She finds such sort of the same thing with the bears, and her relationship with Yorick is gorgeous. Again, like one of just it's a thing that it's like it's hard to talk about this book because I love it so much and because it's so good.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think like you know, basically the pre-maturity, the which oftentimes is looked at as a negative thing. But with the innocence of the youth in this world, their demons have the ability to change. They have the ability to try on these, like, as you said, different personalities, these different hats before they become more fixed and before they become more conscious of themselves, self-conscious. And it is beautiful. And I think that maybe in another world, maybe one that we didn't see, maybe there are people that's demons never stop changing. Maybe there are people whose personality is not hindered or encumbered by this idea of what you have to be in a society, or your self-awareness getting in the way of letting you grow and change throughout your
Yeah.
life.
I think there's this repeated phrase that Lyra wants everything to stay the same. And it's
Mhm.
not explicitly, I don't want to grow up, but it's, I wish things would stop changing. And they
Yeah.
do really, really rapidly change for this little girl. And I think that is so frustrating that your demon can freeze, especially because I think like the beautiful thing about adulthood and growing is that you never stop changing if you want to, if you're conscious of it, that you can always keep going. And the idea that like your demon, when it settles, reveals like your true self, your innermost nature, I think can be a bit of a bummer if you're a really
Mhm.
crummy person and then you get stuck that way.
Mhm.
And I loved the amount of insight it gave to other people. The lore is so deep in this world that there's a taboo against other people touching other people's demons, that
Yes.
it's rare that demons talk to people that aren't their people. I thought it
Hmm.
was great that it is not unheard of, but very rare that a person has a demon that's the same gender as them.
Yes, which made me like it made me think about queerness. And I'm like,
Yes.
is that what we're trying to say here? Or like a transness? I was definitely curious about that. And then also just like there are people, for example, like a fisherman, whose demon might be a dolphin. And then it's
Hmm.
like, well, if your demon's a dolphin, you're not really going to be able to go on land very far if you have this creature, and it's painful to be separated from your demon. You're not able to be away from it for long periods of time without experiencing excruciating pain, um, which I think is also maybe the idea of like losing yourself or losing your
Yeah.
soul, your idea of who you are.
I love this book so much because, like you said, he does not hold anything back. There are such complex questions in this. He explicitly, in some of my research, was like, I don't think there should be labels of like what age group this is for, of like this is a girl's book versus a boy's book. That doesn't benefit anyone. And the sort of the big bad in this is that Mrs. Coulter is trying to split or sever or separate kids from their demons. And one thing I wanted to say before we got to that, like you were saying, there are people who it seems like their demon is indicative of their job. So like all the
Hmm.
butlers have dogs
Yes.
for demons. And that was very interesting to me. And I think like you said, because there are all these different worlds, it doesn't mean that Pullman is like saying that this is good or how it should be.
Hmm.
But that, and I think like all the nurses when they're in the north might also have all the same demons. I thought that was fascinating. And like, and then if you're born and you grow up and you have a dog, or like you have a demon that settles into a dog, or you're just like, well, I
Hmm.
guess I can't do anything really cool. I can't be more than this. How limiting that is.
Mm. Yeah, the idea that you're predestined, or that the way that you settle at, I guess, say, throughout maturity, or when you're reaching puberty,
Mm-hmm.
is when you're going to be locked into this idea. And I think that, especially in this world where it's so there, it's so tangible, it's in front of you, it's not something within you, everyone can see it. If you
Yeah.
see somebody with this particular cocker spaniel, you might know before you look at them that that's your butler, right?
Right.
So yeah, the jobs were always very interesting to me when a person had a very distinct animal connected with them, or if a person had a totally different. Like obviously Mrs. Coulter has this golden monkey, which is beautiful but devious, and it's like it's exotic, it's interesting, it's beautiful, it's different than all the other creatures that we're seeing, except for maybe like the snow leopard
Exactly. The
of
like the
Lord
two
Asriel.
strongest characters have the most like exotic and yet specific, because I think everyone else is like a cat, a bird, a dog.
Right.
And these are so specific. And this concept that is explored with the bears, that you were never alone. I think
Mm,
that was, as an only child, that was such an intriguing thing of
mm,
absolutely never being alone.
yeah.
I wonder, do you have siblings? How did that just concept play out to you when you read this when you were younger?
I don't know if I quite thought about it as broadly when I was younger. I think that, I grew up with two siblings, two younger brothers, and we're all 5 years apart. So it all felt like we were, going through like distinctly different parts of our lives. We were never in the same school. We were always had very different interests. So we were very, and still are very different people. And so the idea of like never being alone, I think that resonated a bit more, when I reread it as an adult. And I guess like the idea of, being self-reliant and having your own best interests in mind and believing yourself in the way that maybe you would believe in somebody that's outside of you. Because when you have a literal representation of your soul that is physically materialized in front of you, it's much easier, I think, to maybe empathize or to encourage that part of, in theory, yourself than it is maybe in our world where we have that inside us. That is something that we do not get to see regularly. So I guess I never really considered um, the idea necessarily of like you're never really like alone. But I like that. I like that it's a bit more of a intentional act to
Yeah.
tell yourself like, hey, like you got it, you're good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like, and something that always struck me so much is obviously they have a unity of like they know what each other is thinking, they're able to act together, and yet some of the most interesting moments are when they are in conflict with each other.
Mm,
So in the opening sequences, Lyra's getting up to all sorts of mischief, and Pan is saying like this is really dangerous, I don't like doing
mhm,
this, sort of voice of caution and reason, which as a very anxious kid I was always like very thankful for. I was thankful for the
mhm.
Hermiones who were like, we are going to get detention and it's going to suck. But I
Yeah.
think one of the most interesting scenes is when she is going to meet Yorick for the first time, and she is scared, and that relationship is all about fear and conquering fear, and just phenomenal. And Pan is pushing. Pan
Mm,
keeps going forward, and he knows that it's painful, and he's tugging on this leash towards her. I loved that scene, and I loved that idea of literally pushing yourself into the
mm,
things that are uncomfortable. It's just what a great concept literary device. I mean, that could be the one thing in the book that is different from our own universe, is one of the opening lines, and yet it's just just one part of this
mhm.
amazing. Oh
And it's interesting that there are different, creatures in this world that have different rules. So it's like,
my
you've
god. Yeah.
got the people that have, or are, I guess, are the version of people in this world that have their demons outside their bodies, that represent their souls. You've got the witches that have that also have demons, but they can travel very far away from their souls. And then you have these armored bears that have the representation of their soul in a inanimate object in their
Mhm.
armor. So it's so distinctly different, just between like just all three, just those three. And so I think that having these three creatures that can communicate, that have such different, I guess, experiences in the world that they live in, it makes them grow envious of each other, of like
Yeah.
the abilities that they're witnessing of the other people. So like you've got the King of the Bears who wants a demon of his own so desperately. He wants to be basically be a person. He wants to
Yeah.
have that, and that's how Lyra gets in there.
Yeah, that's his downfall. Yeah.
Yeah, his own downfall because he's not comfortable with who he is. He wants more.
Yeah, and the pervading idea with the bears that they can create their soul and shape their soul
Mhm.
and lose it and make a new one
Mm.
is so, I can't even start to understand like all of the ramifications and possibilities of that. And like you said, I think it's one of the starkest images in the book is when she comes into, the bear castle and there's this bear king holding a little doll.
Yeah.
It's pathetic. I think like Pullman gives you all of these mixtures of emotion. I think something I was thinking of just before we logged on is like there are moments between Lyra and Mrs. Coulter where she is completely repulsed by this woman and knows how bad she is, and yet it wants the tenderness, wants the kindness. I think there is that conflict of like, I hate this person, and yet I still want to be loved by my mom. How devastating that is.
Yeah, I loved the complexity of these relationships and the characters. Thought, there were times when I hated Mrs. Coulter. There were times when I was rooting for her. Because she does have a love for Lyra. She does want what's best for her, and her, all good villains think that they're doing the right thing. And so because she is a scientist, because she wants to learn more about the world that she exists in, she does really dark, dastardly things to children, intercision, to create this like burst of energy that would allow for her or whoever to travel between worlds, which is where the Northern Lights come in, where we get to see a representation of another world, a portal that's created by this burst of energy. And I was so excited to like as a reader to be able to go through these different worlds, but I was devastated, by like the deaths, and I was devastated by, the betrayals that are so glaringly obvious to like the reader and to Lyra by both her mother and her father. And yet I understood why they did it. I understood like their perspective, and I questioned myself whether or not the result was worth, the action.
Yeah, and there's even that conflict in Lyra. I think every time, and especially as the book goes on, every time Lord Asriel does something, she said, like, I gotta respect it. Like, I respect his ambition. I respect, not the means, but the end. And there's so
Hmm.
many, like, amazing cinematic scenes. I mean, the final showdown, I mean, it's not even a showdown, but that final conversation between Asriel and Coulter.
Mm.
And that every character is phenomenal. Asriel's speech to her there is like, come with me and I will love you. Don't come with me and I will completely forget about you and never think about you again.
Mm.
It's the whole time he knows that Lyra is his daughter, and yet I think the first introduction we have to him is him saying, I'll kill you if you make a sound.
Yeah. Definitely they were not made to be parents. They're very irresponsible parents, but very fascinating characters and scientists, and they have a mission that they're want to complete so desperately, and they're like basically they have very similar goals in a lot of ways, but they're adversaries. Like they want a lot of the same things, and they will do what it takes to get them. And yet, at the beginning at least, we view them as really starkly hero versus villain, and not the complex real versions of them, which is like they are very much heroes and they are very much villains.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet you want to root for them, and Lyra experiences those same conflicts. We are so with her and everything. There's there's just such, I don't even know where I was going with it. There's such a push and pull, and there's, I
Mhm.
mean, I'm at a loss for
And
words. What a
I
good
mean,
book.
throughout it, also like obviously Lyra has like this guiding force. Like she has this alethiometer, this like truth teller,
Yeah.
essentially, that runs on the same kind of energy that this whole kind of series is based around, Dust. And the idea that, like, she is able to intuitively begin to read and kind of have a psychic intuition about specific questions that she asks, almost like the universe is answering her, which I loved. I loved that there was this like guiding force that was created by this device, and then later in the third book we get to see it represented in a computer. Like we see it in such a different way. And it's like, it makes me, when I read these books, oftentimes I was thinking about like, what's like the one to one of like our world to their worlds? And like, what does that represent? And I always kind of wondered what the alethiometer could be represented by in ours. And I don't think there is one really. I don't think there is like a hard and fast one to one, but like maybe it's just like this idea of this like gut instinct or intuition. If everything's inside and you have this idea, sometimes you have this feeling of what you know you need to do, or like what's right. Maybe that's it.
Yeah. And it being written in 95, I think is so interesting. I saw something that said in 95, I think 1% of the UK had access to the internet at home. And it's this moment just for a technological explosion. And I think the alethiometer is about knowledge, of course, of the future, and the internet is this beacon of knowledge. But like you said, for me, the thing that was so fascinating is this intuition. And I
Mm-hmm.
think all of the symbolism and the layers, the level of calm required to do it, and I can't think of the aphorism, but like wisdom from the mouths of babes. And I think one of the things that I loved pretty early on is John Fa, the king of the Egyptians. At one point, he just treats her so well, and that's such a great character and community. And he learns about the alethiometer, and he says, "You've done a really good job of keeping that safe so far, so we're gonna let you continue to keep that safe, and we'll
Yeah.
trust you with that." I loved the whole scene with the Egyptian meeting. I love that he says, "We are keeping her safe." End of
Mm-hmm.
conversation. Another guy stands up and says, like, well, that's putting a lot of us at risk. And John Fogg goes, "I know you're a better man than this.
Yeah.
I know you are." And shuts it down.
I mean, there's a lot of just like people standing up for what they really believe in throughout the series, whether it's good, or perceived good or bad. Like all the characters are really, really driven, and there's so much at stake for everybody. It seems small, but like just like Lyra at the beginning being like, I need to rescue Roger. Like I need to be able to rescue my friend who's been taken by this bizarre, scary organization, and I don't know what's happening to these missing kids. And then the world expands so quickly before us. We get to see all of the reasoning and why this is happening and all the darkness, but just like the small guiding light that these people, that even she had just in this moment, that obviously sets off a chain of events that then become so much bigger than she could have ever imagined.
I always felt bad because I was like, I don't care about Roger. I'm so sorry, Lyra. Like, I care about
Yeah,
you, but just I'm not there for him. But his
yeah,
death is heartbreaking and devastating.
yeah.
That I mean, talk about a movie moment every time when she shows up at Lord Asriel's house at the end, and he says, "I did not send for you." Like, what a line even
Mhm.
to it always sticks with me. She comes to a point where she's like, I forgot about Roger, and I feel horrible about that. She has her flaws, and she's a child, so they're
Yeah,
and I think that's great to like to be a kid and to see that and see her still as a complete and wonderful person. She challenges her own beliefs a lot, and I think like even with this shadowy organization that at the beginning sounds like an urban legend of like these people are coming and they're snatching you
goblins.
up. Exactly. They sound like, a made up story to tell your kids to come in at night or something
Right.
like that.
Folklore.
Exactly. That's the word for it. And yet, and I think there's, one of the pervading messages is adults are wrong often, or they are lying to you, or they are keeping secrets. And so that it's like from the beginning, the children are correct. That they are onto something and they know something. And I just keep coming. I just saying and then freezing and getting lost in the sauce of the book.
Yeah, I mean they have like really unobstructed views of like their world. Like they literally are oftentimes like running across the roofs of the buildings, so they're kind of like seeing the world from a very different perspective than the adults around them. And all the adults have, clear agendas, or they have individual missions that they're on, whether it's just to like raise more money for the college, or if it's to the Egyptians are traveling and kind of just making sure that they have enough money and means in order to like keep their young, safe. Yeah, the idea of like the adults can be wrong, and the importance of a I guess like a pure like unadulterated goodness, I think, is really important too, throughout the series, because regardless of like the extraordinary discoveries that Asriel and Mrs. Coulter are able to make because of their work, the violence that's included in it, there is like such an inherent darkness and evil about it that I think is so clearly lost when your life becomes so focused on your work, maybe, or like a mission, an idealized party. It makes me think of politics too,
Yeah.
you know? And I just like, I'm glad that it reminds me of that, like as an adult too, that like I do want to have a continued kind of like goodness in
Yeah.
in how I move through the world. And sometimes it means, talking back to scary people that have a lot of power. And or maybe it's just being aware of it. Maybe it's just being aware that those powers are around. Not to become a conspiracy theorist, but like
Mhm.
just to have an awareness that like, hey, yeah, oftentimes there are systems that are put in place to keep people in power, and they will protect it. They will make sure that that's not taken down.
This book I think is my favorite that we've covered on the podcast. Like this and Hunger Games are sort of are parallel to each other because they both are talking about like there are systems of power that
Mhm.
are constructed that you have to, in the Hunger Games and this as well, you can try to obliterate, but they are there, and at least for a while you have to learn to work within them. And going back to the Egyptians, I mean, it was a few small moments, but they said like we as a community are going to be more affected by these things,
Mhm.
by the gobblers, than you are, and I think we're also going to be less believed, which was such a little moment, and yet like it gives you as a kid a way to talk about those things.
Mhm.
There's even a moment where I think Tony Costa says like, yeah, you can live with us, but you aren't one of us, and you're never going to be one of us.
Right.
um,
Yeah, yeah, and just, being really frank about like, hey, like you might be able to have perspective on the way that we move through the world, but you don't have an authority or a the full scope of an experience. And I think that like there is that, you know, curiosity in Lyra to, and also like as just a childlike like want to be accepted everywhere you go. um
yeah.
and it's important to her. And I yeah, I loved her relationship with the Egyptians, and I loved just the way that she moved through like these different worlds, and just like these different people's experiences with like respect for everybody, but at the same time like a
Yeah.
really discerning eye, like to be like, I know what's right and what's wrong, and we're not gonna F around here.
Yeah, I think the opening, not opening, but the early sequence and time with Miss Coulter is fascinating because she immediately is in love with this woman. She's very typified by like just the essence and beacon of femininity, of glamour.
Mhm.
Um, and yet there is something sinister there, especially in the monkey. I think that's the first, that early scene where the monkey fights, sort of tackles Pan,
Yeah.
is so affecting and chilling. I think just, and it's a world we are not yet
And it
used to,
seems
and
like
yet
the monkey's going to like choke Pan, is going to really, really, and it does hurt him.
mhm.
And he says it hurts, and Lyra feels it because they're connected, and it's deeply scary. And the monkey is just like it's an outward expression of a very inward reality that Mrs.
Mhm.
Coulter experiences. She has this cunning, devious inside voice that is really, really hungry and really
That's the perfect way to put
eager.
it. Yeah, real
Yeah,
hunger.
just hungry for power. I mean, clearly the monkey wants to retrieve the alethiometer for her. She wants answers. Information is everything for her. And the fact that her own daughter, who, we learn all this like that Lyra's, her daughter. We learned that pretty early, I think. Yeah, and then Lord Asriel, we learn that he's her father a little later, I think.
I think they're the same
Or is
scene.
it the
I
same
was
scene?
reviewing earlier, and it's like I was reading it on Libby, and they have on the bottom your progress, and
Yeah.
it was at 30%. It was
Okay.
right at the end of the first act. I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's yeah, she just world is rocked, but also like it makes sense. It's like I have this understanding of why I'm being called to these people, or why I have this like eagerness about learning so much about what they're doing, and how they're moving through the world, because it's just fascinating to her. She's bored by the college. She's like I don't need to, yeah, I need to get out and explore. I need to see what you're seeing.
I'm always going to be endlessly fascinated by Coulter and the Golden Monkey. The scene in which the monkey tackles Pan in the show is phenomenal. It's a great scene. And there's a moment, I think maybe right before, where Pan is talking to Lyra, and he says that he saw Miss Coulter like holding on to the monkey and with like white knuckles. And there's, I forget exactly what it is in the scene in the show, but they expand that a little bit further, of her like hurting her demon. And I think that's like scary, just on a level of like seeing a grown person hurt an animal. And then it still has, I consciously have to remember, like, no, that's herself.
Yeah.
And how tragic that is.
Yeah, this sort of like inner rage mixed with a restraint
Mm-hmm.
of just going ape shit, for no pun intended, but like,
But yeah.
like she has, like she's an adult, like if you're a well-adjusted person, like you are able to rein in your emotions. But for her, she feels things so severely and so deeply that like maybe in a person you would see them gripping their arm with like and leaving nail indentation or whatever it is, but because it's physicalized, we see this version of her, it's outside. Yeah, she's like, it's almost like a distraction, like harming herself through the monkey. It was also very interesting throughout just the books, just the idea that like this thing is yourself, but has its own almost consciousness. Like it maybe is representative of like the soul is a part of the unconscious mind, and that like it has its own desires and its own perspectives that are sometimes at odds with the consciousness. And it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that that's all a complex part of the way that you move through the world, which was always really curious to me.
And in some way, that when your demon settles, that you lose some degree of that.
Mm,
And I think like just at the baseline of like, even as you grow older, grow smarter, I think like at some point in puberty it becomes really hard to get the same level of insight into yourself.
mm.
um because all of those external things come in. Yeah.
Yeah, the it was always really interesting about like the idea that dust represented like original sin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that like Adam and Eve and like that somehow the biting into the apple represented this like this self-awareness, this like almost turning to inward, becoming aware of yourself, which is aligned with the maturing of a child into an adult, and that they all stem from original sin. Like the reason of the tethering between these beings is because of that. I mean, that is so blatantly, obviously, related to religion and, the religion that is in our world. Um, but I was always fascinated with how like distinctly they were like, this is what it is, you
Yep.
know?
Yep. And that they say this is what it is in book one, so we can really go apeshit with it in books two and three. And I think I haven't read the Bible, I don't know it very well, but that I think you might have said it. I that they eat the apple, dust, and to dust you shall return, and that's when they get clothed. And to me that was like, I don't know if I ever realized that that was the start of shame as
Hmm.
clearly as it is here.
Yeah.
Um and I don't know what how much shame sort of plays into this, because Lyra doesn't really seem to experience that. And is that like, is that it? Well, certainly is a thing that escalates with puberty and self-consciousness.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I think that there is just a, childlike wonder and just a youthful innocence of the way that, especially in this world, like people experience the world. Kids experience the world in particular. And there is something that is, sort of lost or like hardened because of the way that the world is, because of the harshness, because of the difficulties, the way that you have to survive, that you have to almost become part of like a machine. You have to, your creature has to it has to become a fixed. It has to whether it's a job, whether it's like, I know what I am, I'm becoming obedient, I'm going to be a dog, or my creature is a dog because I am from a line of butlers, or I am a hardworking, rancher, and so I'm going to have a horse. It's so maybe built into the way that just the culture is in this world, that maybe there are people that live on the other side of this planet that their creatures don't become fixed. Maybe that they always are changing. Who knows? I mean, that would be really interesting. I'd love to explore that.
Yeah, there's such little details of, even like they mentioned New France a couple times. The like the he does, obviously the world is so well built even outside of, England and the little bits that we see. And
Right.
there's the fucking blimps. I mean, I think this is
Mhm.
really for a lot of kids where you either start in like steampunk or get bit by the dark academia bug. And I think it
Right.
was the latter for me.
Yeah,
And that's
absolutely.
fine. That's good. Yeah.
I agree. Less steampunk, more dark academia.
The steampunk is really just the blimps.
Lee Scoresby and the hot air balloons. And yeah, I mean,
He and the bear have more backstory than I remember. It is not really touched on, but
yes.
that's just a fascinating dynamic. They were in the wars together.
Yes, they have more. It definitely is touched on in the second and third
Mm-hmm.
books more distinctly, especially when we find out about. Are we spoiling things for people? Like
Go for it.
Lee dies in the third book, I believe, and Yorick Burnison eats his body.
Yeah.
And I was like, huh.
Yeah. It's I remember sobbing reading it.
Yeah.
And then as I was reading it, the first season of the show was coming out, so I was like, Lin-Manuel eaten by polar bear on
Right.
my screen?
Are they continuing the series?
I think, yeah, it's finished. I watched like the first half of season two, but I never got into the Lin-Manuel eaten by a polar bear, and I don't even know
Okay,
if
I
it's in
need
the
to
show.
watch
Just
because
for that.
I need to watch
Yeah.
just for that. Just because I'm wondering if I wonder if they dip into that.
Because it's a great, like, Tumblr would go crazy for that. The
Yeah. I have a question. Who's your favorite character throughout all the books?
Oh, I don't remember the second and third super well, but the is it Dr. Mary in the second and third book?
Yes,
I really
yes.
love her. I think she was just like finally like a really nice adult to like take on and level with Lyra. I remember really liking Will and just it's the trio. It's the family of
Right.
Lyra and her parents because they all are sort of together. It's Lyra. I
Yeah.
love Lyra.
I was fascinated by that doctor character because I think that she was supposed to represent like the snake, right? Like I feel like I think that was referenced in the books, and then
Mhm.
maybe upon like reading, like that she's supposed to be the person that brings the apple, that creates this awareness, or like helps facilitate it, which was
Yeah.
always so interesting to me. Because we mostly see her initially in this elephant world where there are these elephant creatures with these. I mean, we see her with Lyra when Lyra, investigates this dark matter.
Right,
But
right.
when she finds, that when she has this window into this new world, we didn't even get into the subtle knife. I mean, the subtle knife in itself is just a
Wow.
fascinating. I loved that device just to be
Yeah.
used to navigate. But yeah, when she's in the elephant world with the nuts, the nut wheels.
And the nuts like have precious oils in them? Do I remember that
Yes,
correctly?
the oils that give the elephant creatures sentience, that cause them
I
to
forgot that part.
interact more with the dust. And it's the idea of like this like sentience, this self-awareness in this world, this dimension, that gives them the connection to everything,
Hmm. Yeah.
and how it differs. So it's a common theme, but it's so different in the
Yeah.
facilitation of how that connection is made, you know?
Yeah, and I don't know how often Pullman has his own mind made up about all of these questions, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are very clear ideas and themes that he, sends home throughout the books, standing up to authority, about kind of like cult mindsets.
Hmm, absolutely.
And I think about like there's just like these inner, I mean, kind of like inner demons that
Yeah.
literally that all of these people uh, are fighting because they're Lyra has to oftentimes even do things that she doesn't think is right, or like has to like go along with ideas, like even after Lord Asriel kills Roger, and then she's like, well, I'm still gonna step through this world, into this
Yeah.
burst of energy. It's there. I don't agree with the way that it happened. I'm devastated by it, but I
Mhm.
have to go through.
Yeah, yeah, and I wonder what I something that fascinated me is later on, I think it's when she's with Egyptians, someone says like everyone at Oxford loved you. They loved you like you were their own child. And I think she didn't cognitively recognize that, but I think that moment to take that big leap into the next world is this idea that came up in the Hunger Games a lot for me is like what do we owe each other as people, as humans to continue and to be together. And I
Mm,
owe it. I think it is like with Roger, it's like she has this pragmatism of like he's dead and I can't do that. So I got to make this worth something.
right. Yeah. Yeah, she has to like grow up really quickly. And like, I mean, by the end of the series, I mean, her demon is set. And it's
Is it an ermine? Like
yes,
a weasel?
Yes. And, they have to make she and Will, who have been brought together because of the circumstances that unfold after these worlds are connected, have to make a very conscious and deliberate decision, despite having fallen in love with each other, to not be in the same world because
Yeah.
there was a theme that I wonder if it might have been Lord Asriel that mentioned that you can't stay too long outside of your
Oh,
own world because if you do, you start to lose yourself and like you start to it like will kill you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, do I remember that correct? I know Will's father in Will's like timeline universe disappears when he's young, and then he goes
Yes.
into, I think, Lyra's world and finds his father there.
Yes.
And he's played by Andrew Scott, Hot Priest from Fleabag.
No
Uh,
way.
and does he die because he's been in the wrong place for too long? Is that how that goes down? Or is he
Yes,
being
he
hunted?
dies. He dies pretty soon after meeting Will.
Mm-hmm.
Will like meets his dad and then he dies
Yeah,
pretty
pretty much
soon after.
immediately.
Like pretty immediately. And it's just like these kids are experiencing such trauma and are, trying so desperately to like make sure that like dead are okay. And like there's there's the idea of like you've got your soul represented by these creatures, and then you have your spirit, that's represented by ghosts that are literally in like the underworld in this different and
Yeah.
it's not even the under it's just a different dimension, just like Will's world is different from Lyra's, but the world that the dead go to is just another cut away from the subtle knife. And, I think that definitely the idea of the body, the soul, and the spirit, the Trinity.
A holy one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's another reference to, religious it's like it's just so well
It's so good.
it's so good. It's
It's so
so
good.
smart and it's complex and I loved when they went to the underworld or like the other the
Yeah, in the
so
third book,
scary.
yeah, and if I remember correctly, they have to leave their demons outside.
Yes,
And
they do. And it's so painful and they
yeah.
have to basically like meet their own death. They have to meet the representations of their own death, which are like these like shadowy silhouette
Yeah.
figures. Yeah, it's such a great series, and I wish that people would read it if they knew how complex and dark it was. But I think when it came
Mhm.
out, it was like almost people thought it was a kids movie,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
I
Yeah,
feel like
there
it
I had a
was
Nintendo DS game for it for the 2007
really.
movie. Yeah, and I just remember getting to meet a polar bear, and then the game to like write on the polar bear was too hard, and I just gave up. But yeah, and it was Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig, and the girl who played Lyra went on to Skins, um,
Right.
and I loved her on Skins. It was one of like
Oh,
three
what a
kids that
show.
people today don't get it. Maybe they do because they have Euphoria, but Skins was grimy.
Oh, Skins was like just I never been so scandalized.
Yes. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah, coming home from summer camp and watching Skins.
Yeah.
I loved this I'm a sucker for a prophecy. And I loved that the pervading one is that Lyra has to do it without knowing what she's doing. And that I think John Foss says she can't
Hmm.
know what she's doing, so we have to let her be free to make mistakes. And then
Hmm.
I think Serafina Pekkala, one of the witches, near the end says that she's supposed to be the end of destiny.
Hmm.
Holy moly.
That Lyra is supposed to be?
Yeah, or I believe so. I think it's in like the same conversation. It's a little vague, but in the same conversation as discussing this is the child we have waited for.
Yeah, that is interesting because it then calls into I mean, if we're gonna relate everything to ourselves and our world that we live in, of like, when does this take place? If it takes place far before our time, then maybe there was a time in a world where there was, this predestination, there was this destiny that had to be followed, but the idea of knowing what it was supposed to be would actually interfere with the destiny itself. And then it calls into question free will and like
Yeah.
what is supposed to happen, and did somebody have to die because of, it's that is interesting. The idea of like she is the end of destiny
Yeah.
is very curious.
And just even in the prophecy at the beginning, it's that she will be betrayed, and yet the reveal is that she is the one doing the betraying without
Mhm.
knowing. Just devastating. Just
Yeah. And the
and I
betrayal of
mm,
herself,
yeah.
because she has to leave herself behind. She has to leave her demon behind in order to go into the world of the dead.
Yeah.
And so this like ultimate betrayal. Yeah, it was interesting when that happened. I was like, I could understand how painful, like, all right, just the way that it had been conveyed. But I was almost like
Mhm.
relieved. I was like relieved that it was a betrayal of herself in a way,
Yeah.
rather than it being like a betrayal of Will or like a betrayal
Yeah.
of another person. Because to me, like, maybe that's kind of phrased to be a betrayal, but I I didn't view it that way. I didn't view it to be
Yeah.
this like utter betrayal. I viewed it as like, oh, she's making a really, really hard decision, and Pan is like such a distinct part of her, but she, I think deep down just knows that she's going to find him again. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe she's like, I actually don't know if I'm gonna be able to come back. I might die in this other world, but I know that I can't bring him with me. You know,
Yeah.
really sad.
Yeah. I remember reading up to it, dreading it, like knowing it
Yeah,
was gonna happen, and oh, just begging for it not to.
yeah.
There was one line that I wrote down earlier today I think it's after she learns who her parents are. It's a third person narrator line where it's something like Lyra is off with her new sense of her own story. I just thought that was fantastic. That is a theme that comes up continually in this podcast about telling your own story and also
Mhm.
telling it as it's happening. Isn't it the most radical to write a story that goes beyond the worlds, that goes beyond expectation of destiny, of how things are, like the laws of physics?
Absolutely. I think that it's not that she's like fearless, like she's absolutely held back by all of the natural fears that one would have navigating a really vicious, violent world where there are forces moving against you actively, and also moving into other worlds literally that you have no preconceived notions of, or like know what's safe. Like literally the world
Yeah.
that she goes to first, that abandoned, like strange, like Italian seeming town that like
Yes, with angels
Patsy,
and
that have like these invisible creatures that will suck the soul out of you when you reach that, like the age of maturity,
yeah.
and it will ultimately kill you, or it'll leave you as this like husk of a person. Yeah. Yeah, she like navigates all of this without being fearless, but acting despite fear.
Yeah. I think there might even be a line when she drops herself into so many predicaments, but it's a thing of like she wasn't afraid because she was a child without imagination, and it's
Mhm.
something like she can't imagine all of the possible horrible things that might happen. I was so almost confused by that line, and yet I really like it.
Yeah.
um,
There's one line that I quite liked that was, "That's the duty of the old, to be anxious on behalf of the young, and the duty of the young is to scorn the anxiety of the old."
I highlighted that too. It's just
Yeah.
so good and so apt and so on it. It just
Mhm.
there's not every single level of this writing is so incredible.
And profound and
Yeah.
simple
Yeah.
and relatable despite how fantastical it is. And it's like haunting and it's beautiful and it's strange. And
Yeah.
I just think it's so exciting. My favorite type of book is just one where so much happen. I love this clear, long, just interesting, complex plot. I can appreciate a quiet story, but I think that the books that I find the most delicious,
Yeah.
is like a book like this.
Yeah.
Is it makes you think, it is strange, eclectic, it's got interesting visuals, it's a different world, and also these characters are so
So
fun. And like I care so deeply about so many of them, and
yes.
also I hate them, and I it's every feeling.
Yeah, it is a book with, at least for me and my tastes, is so it grabs you so tight.
Yeah.
It engages you emotionally to such a high extreme.
Yeah.
Um Man.
Oh, if your demon
Oh,
settled, what would your demon be?
the eternal question, you know?
Yeah.
Do you have an answer?
Um, you know, I think that mine would be a monkey.
Why?
I think that like because it's playful, it would be not the golden monkey. It would
Yes.
be definitely a chiller, like
Yeah.
silly monkey. But I like the idea of having a particular color, maybe like
Yeah.
bronze.
One of
Like
those that like sit in the hot springs in the north and like drink juice boxes on Instagram. Do you know what
that
I'm
would
talking
be.
about?
Are you like the ones like in China?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're talking about Star, I know exactly who you're talking about. Like live in a temple.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that mine would be a like playful monkey
Yeah.
because I think that I do have a sort of like childlike, or I try to keep that alive. I try
Mhm.
to keep that alive in myself. And so I think that it would be nice to have a reminder to be like, hey, have fun when you can have fun.
Yeah. And I think that a demon is meant to be, yeah, those things that you can't as easily maybe externalize. I don't
Hmm.
know. There's Pan is the voice of caution when Lyra is such an adventurer. I don't know what mine would be. I think like the I've always been a cat person, and so I that but that
Mm.
feels like too easy, too cheap of an answer. I feel like it would have to be real little, whatever I am, or real big. I don't know.
Hmm.
I've been told I have tall energy,
Mm.
not bones. Oh,
So either something small or tall.
something nothing medium.
Nothing medium.
My boyfriend, as a joke the other day, where he made a funny headstone for himself and printed it out with AI, and he's put it on the walls. And then I found it very sweet. He did one for me, and it read, "Smaller than average coffin, larger than average life." And
Aww.
he isn't that good.
That's very sweet. It's like spooky, but it's sweet.
Yeah,
Different Sour Patch flavor. There's spooky and then there's sweet.
you should sell that to them. Halloween's coming.
I'm sure they're on it. Damn it. I should have really gotten to them earlier.
How does having revisited, like, have you revisited it as an adult before? What was the experience like of rereading it?
I reread it last year. I reread the whole series.
Mhm.
And I just thought it was so incredibly written
Yeah.
and so genius, and it was thought provoking and beautiful and devastating and interesting and explorative and colorful and bleak. It had all of these different elements, and I was so transfixed by everything, and I had forgotten so much.
Yeah.
And I don't think the first time I had read it, I don't think I had finished the series, and so like going back and like reading the entire three books, I was like, wow, this is like affecting me much more profoundly, I think, as an adult than maybe I would have appreciated as a kid.
I think it definitely rewards rereading. And
Hmm.
I also wonder, like, isn't it a beautiful thing that Philip Pullman gave kids a book that kind of grows with them
Yeah.
almost? If I were to write an essay for this, I would give myself a gold star for that line. Uh,
Absolutely.
would you consider it required reading?
I think it should be.
Oh, yeah,
I think that
absolutely.
I'm sure that it's banned in many places, but I think that it's just a reminder to do your own research. No, I'm just kidding. Uh,
But yeah,
but
to
honestly,
question power,
to question
absolutely.
authority and to, I think, follow you like internal goodness, like
Yeah,
your moral compass. We've got the golden compass, we've got a moral compass. I
exactly.
think that, as long as your North Star is right, then and you're heading in a way that feels good, I think that that's really important.
Absolutely. I absolutely consider it required reading. Bare minimum if you have to like take an English class just for how well it's written. Oh my god.
Agree. And character development. I mean, oh my
Oh
God.
my god. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything you'd like to plug before we end?
Oh my goodness. Do I have anything to plug right now? Let's see. I frequently produce comedy. I am planning on having a lot of stuff at the beginning of this next year, and I've got a couple things lined up with the Elysian, more in May. I'm going to be doing a second season of my live satirical Survivor
Oh my
show,
god.
which I'm very excited for. The first season was incredibly fun and such a wild ride. I'm so grateful for all the amazing comedians and guests that we had on, and for how truly cutthroat all these players played. And I'm excited to see what this next round of performers do. I think it'll be just as exciting, if not more. And yeah, I mean, you can follow me on socials. I think I'm at Sam Walt Jones on all media.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing. And thank you for bringing this book back into my life. Holy god.
Oh,
Wow.
it's an honor. Thank you for speaking with me. If you have any other good book recommendations, I would love.
Oh my gosh. An hour ago I finished Passing by Nella Larson. That was
Okay.
phenomenal. So good. And very short. It was like 120 pages. Really
All
good.
right. I'll check that out. I'm reading the Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo right now.
Oh, I'm a big old Hollywood fan, so I've been told to read that. Let me know how it is.
It's good so far.
All right. Thank you so much to Sam. I mean, a book that I will always want to reread, and I'm getting ready to put that Subtle Knife audiobook on. That sounded really bad for a minute. That sounded really bad. Yes, Texas. Yes, Texas? Yeah? Oh, big yawn. Our next episode is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. So buckle up. Not only did they do ECT, they had insulin shock treatment. Just wild. All right, I'll see you then. Love ya, toodles. I'm afraid that when I say love ya, it sounds like I'm like riffing on Dylan Mulvaney, and I'm not, although she's great. It's just like that's also how I end conversations because love is infinite. Bye.